So, welcome back to Behind the Brief, the podcast where we go beyond the buzzwords and deep dive into marketing strategies that actually work. I'm your host, Shruti Verma, and today's guest is someone who truly gets the power of storytelling, not just in content, but across everything we do as product marketers. Megan started out as a journalist and now runs Product Marketing House, where she helps B2B teams figure out what to say, how to say it, and how to make sure it lands. Whether she's coaching PMMs, talking to customers, or building out go-to-market strategies, she's all about clarity, curiosity, and asking the right questions. So in this episode, we are digging into what it really means to tell a great story in product marketing. How do we get to the heart of what your customers care about, and how do you make your message stick across teams and across channels? So welcome to my show, Megan. I'm really excited to bring you on.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Wow, what an intro. I'm excited to get going.
Absolutely. I love it. And one of the reasons that I reached out to you is because you are a maestro in storytelling and you do that a lot. So I would just want to get started on asking you some of the questions related to storytelling and storytelling that drives action. So, as someone who started in journalism, how was your view of storytelling? How has it evolved now that you're working in product marketing?
Yeah, so I think my degree in journalism really trained me to identify the hook, to identify what is the top thing that people need to know about whatever is happening. I think if you think about your habits, and I know I'm the same way, reading the news, listening to the news, we really read the headlines and we read maybe 1 to 2 sentences in. We might read the rest, but definitely we won't if that top line isn't crisp and clean. And so that's definitely something that I've taken with me into my product marketing approach. And I think, no matter what industry you work in, no matter what type of company you're working for, that knowledge of how to identify the hook and how to express things in a very crisp, clean way is going to benefit you and make your messaging, make your content more impactful than it would be if you didn't have kind of that ability to identify that hook. And so I think as for how it's evolved, I think I've strengthened that muscle in lots of different industries. I worked in 12 different industries over the last year in 2024. And that muscle is different for every single customer type, every single industry that you work in. Crisp and clean looks like is going to be different if you're working for, like a database management company versus a MarTech company and the types of customers that you're looking for. And so I think the one thing that I think I've learned again and again and again over my career that maybe wasn't as pronounced in my experience with journalism is really deeply understanding the customer and the people that you're going to be speaking to in order to make it crisp and clean. Because I think it's kind of taken for granted with being a journalist, like this is the normal, everyday, average person. You really have to get that knowledge first as a product marketer before you can dive in and make messaging that resonates and lands.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am from a literature background and I can vouch for that. And I think people think that it doesn't follow the same chart when we expect it to be in our degrees. It still helps you everywhere in your life. Having a degree like that really evolves you right now we are in product marketing. So I think it evolves and it actually makes a lot of sense whenever we are doing our work in storytelling specifically. So I do vouch for that, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your background in literature and my background in journalism, I think one of the things those two disciplines share is really understanding how to choose the right words. And I think when you get into the messaging and positioning of it all, choosing the exact right word to express the exact right thing becomes really important. I think I've been in positioning and messaging efforts where we're focused on one word for a whole week. Like, what exact word do we want to use to express this? And I think if you don't have our background and our kind of love of words, that might feel a little bit tedious, but it is incredibly meaningful once you kind of understand, where we're coming from, that background that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. And earlier I used to just ramble a lot. Like I would not stop. I did not have brevity as my best friend. But now I try my best. Even in positioning and messaging, you definitely try to make it more precise. You try to make it more catchy. So I think that's something that you keep evolving. But yeah, I believe my rambling has stopped, I hope. But
Yeah.
let's see how that goes in the future as
Yeah.
well.
I'm much better at not rambling in my writing than in my talking. So we'll see how this goes.
I think that works perfect for my podcast.
Great.
Okay, moving on to you talked about your approach in storytelling. So I want to focus a bit more on that. How do you approach storytelling for different stakeholders, for example, customers versus internal teams? We do have, I was just talking to Komal, one of the product marketers, and she mentioned that sales and all the other teams that we work with, like customer success and product team, they all are our customers in product marketing. So, what is your approach of storytelling inside the marketing team?
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think something that people overlook a lot, that internal storytelling, building those relationships and kind of alignment across functions. One of the things I mentioned, one of the things that I've kind of learned over and over is understanding the customer that I'm speaking with. Another thing that I've learned over and over is understanding our internal customers. So I spend a lot of time, whether it's on a consulting fractional basis or whether it's when I was in house, really getting to know and to understand those internal stakeholders. One of the first things that I do as a consultant to get onboarded is I do a round of stakeholder interviews. And I have specific questions that I like to ask that I go back to time and time again. But I really like to meet someone from the customer success team, for example, from the sales team, obviously from product. If there's executive team members that I need to meet with. And I always ask those people, who else should I meet with? Who are kind of like, there's always in every organization, there's kind of hidden thought leaders or people who are specifically like really full of this industry knowledge that I need to get my hands on. Maybe there's a frontline salesperson who isn't necessarily in a leadership role, but almost acts as a leader in the way that they operate and in the kind of the pull that they have with the rest of the team. So I want to uncover those people and I want to understand what makes them tick. I think specifically with sales and customer success, one of the things that I want to understand for them is, what are you worried about right now? What's going to get in the way of you meeting your quota this month, this quarter? What did your last call look like? What are you worried about for your next call? And then from there, I can kind of craft an approach that's going to be tailored to what they need and their problems. So for example, if sales is like, yeah, we get people over the line and then customer success tells us we're not the right people and they churn, I don't understand what's happening. Great. In my mind, I say it's time to pull out some win-loss analysis. Let's talk to some of these people that have churned. Let's maybe talk to some people that decided to go with us versus who didn't. Let's really understand this problem. And maybe that means we redesign the sales deck. Maybe it means we need some new features. We need to talk to product about this, but really deeply understanding those internal stakeholders and those internal customers is incredibly important to my success as a product marketer. And it really drives everything that I do because I think we see on LinkedIn and in all these places like 10 steps to being like a great product marketer. Just follow this go-to-market plan and you'll be set. And I don't buy that because every organization, every industry is so different in the problems that they're facing. And as a product marketer, you have to be a little bit of a detective and have a bunch of tools in your tool belt and know when to pull out the right ones at the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. I just love the fact that you just shared that because I have a follow up on that question. And because we do carry a lot of things as a product marketer, we have so many things that we'll be juggling. So, asking the right questions is something that I feel always tops the chart whenever you are doing a good job versus a bad job as a product marketer. So I just wanted to focus more on how do you do that? Like, how do you craft better questions, craft questions that work for you?
Yeah.
Because we work with so many teams and we want to make sure that we are not just asking questions for the sake of it, for the sake of meetings, but we are asking questions for the value that we drive out of it and how it makes our job easier as a product marketer. So how How do you actually do that?
Yeah, it's been a lot of trial and error, and I really do treat it kind of like a science project, you know? Now I have kind of a list of questions that I know that I like, but it's been a lot of trying and getting great answers and trying a question and seeing people be like, "What are you even asking me?" And being like, "Okay, well, I'm never going to ask that question again. On to the next one." I also think there's a lot of magic in a really great follow-up question because I think the initial question might unlock the door, but then you really have to listen and say, you mentioned that, you get a lot of people on demos, but you can't get them to come back. What does that look like? What is your diagnosis of the problem? What are you doing today? And really not be afraid to kind of go one or two or three or even four levels deeper than that. I think sometimes we get stuck in a little bit of like I've got to get to all the questions on my list, but the magic really happens in those follow-up questions and letting the conversation unfold and just kind of like a curiosity of where does this person want the conversation to go aside from my own agenda.
Right. And there's a balance to everything. Having the right set of questions that you have tested and tried with the teams, we have had experience in those areas really work for you. And it has definitely worked for most of us. Like, it has definitely worked for me coming prepared, like doing the background work, doing your own research really works whenever you are handling such important meetings as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Having kind of a path, chart a path, but then not be afraid to kind of deviate from that if the opportunity presents itself.
Exactly. And in one of my conversations with Talia as well, we were just talking about at length on how taking space and asking the right questions is the way to lead and not feeling overwhelmed when we are usually used to asking so many questions. We should not be afraid to be in the meetings and complain about the burnout.
The meeting burden can be real with so much, with product marketing being involved with so many things, but yeah, there's a lot we can do, a lot in our control there, and making the best use of those meetings and being engaged with them too.
Exactly. Moving on to a little bit towards the customer side of things.
Yeah.
As a product marketer, I would like to ask you, how do you balance listening to the customer's words, like, pointing out what the customer is actually saying in the feedback versus interpreting the underlying emotion or context behind it? What's your approach in balancing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's three things that come to mind when I think about that. One, I'm always looking at customer data, like their actual engagement data with the platform and their actual kind of their behavior versus what they say, as well as those customer interviews. So I might hear from a customer like, oh, I don't value this specific thing. But then we look at our customer data and it's like the top used feature. And so I think sometimes that comes from like a mistranslation, like something's lost in translation there. And that's something interesting that we can dig into. Maybe the words I'm using aren't the words that they would use, or maybe they don't understand the feature that they're using and what it's actually doing for them. And that's something that we can kind of dig into as well. So I think that's one thing, pairing data with actual tangible, more subjective conversations can be really helpful. And I think the other thing is what I was talking about with the follow-up questions. I always kind of will reflect back to people what I think I'm hearing so that they can correct me or that we can go one level deeper. So I'll say something like, it sounds to me like one of the biggest stressors to you right now is not being able to communicate effectively with your customers. Is that right? And then usually people will say, yes, that's correct, but it goes deeper than communication. It's actually this, this, and this. And that's kind of where we get to dig into, what do you mean by that? What's the level deeper than just being like, oh, I had identified the pain and now I'm going to move on. And I'll often uncover things in those types of customer interviews where I'm reflecting back to them what I've heard and I'm really trying to deeply understand what they mean. I'll uncover pieces of messaging that I'll just kind of like take right out of their mouth and put it on a landing page because it does so clearly articulate what they mean. The other thing that I always ask, and this is my favorite question to ask in every interview, stakeholder, customer, etc., is if you could, like, if you're speaking to someone exactly like you, say it's at a conference, someone in your role, in your industry, dealing with the same pains that you're dealing with, how would you describe this solution and what it does for you? in maybe 2 sentences or less. And that leads to some really interesting things because people will often describe it in maybe a different way than I would have described it. And that really gets to the heart of the value that people are getting out of it. So they'll say something like, you have to buy this solution because it does X, Y, and Z. And maybe X, Y, and Z aren't necessarily the top features that we had identified, the top value that we had identified. So we can pair that with, okay, is this just this one customer and they're an edge case, or is this something we need to dig into a little bit deeper here?
Yeah, exactly. I think most of the conversations that we have with our customers lead us to a lot of solutions in product marketing. If it's a messaging problem, we just have to see how we can actually make it relevant to the customers. A lot of answers can be driven through customer feedback, listening to them, and focusing your all the attention towards what the customers are actually saying. Maybe it will help you, like you mentioned, just copy paste the messaging of what the customer has mentioned. So I think that works beautifully if you actually focus a little bit more towards what your customers are actually saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So moving on to a little bit of a conflicted zone for us PMMs, I think we are mostly misunderstood in our collaborations with other teams. We are mostly misunderstood with the value that we drive. So, how do you think other teams actually see product marketing? Like, what can we do to help them better understand the value that we provide and what we bring to the table?
Yeah, absolutely. That's another reason that I really, one of the first things that I do in any role is those stakeholder interviews, because a huge part of that is me saying, I'm Megan. This is what product marketing is, and this is tangibly what I'm here to do. And I tailor that specific part towards what their role is. So if I'm talking to a salesperson, I'll say, I'm Megan, I'm a product marketer. Product marketing sits at kind of the intersection of product marketing and sales and really funnels information between those things tangibly. In your world, that's going to look like maybe we work together on one sheets, sales decks, customer stories, etc. And I'd love to hear from you. In that world that I just described, what are some things? Do you have any requests? What are some top things that you'd like to see from me? And we kind of take the conversation from there. So I always frame up the world of product marketing for people in that specific way. I also think those customer interviews are incredibly helpful. Like I said at the beginning, I always want to listen and understand what their pains are. Are we really focusing on churn this quarter? Do we need to get people quicker down the pipeline? Like, what is it that's happening? And then I'll come back from those stakeholder interviews to my client or to my boss or whoever and say, okay, here are the things that I heard in these stakeholder interviews. Sales team is really worried about making their quota, and it's because they just can't get people past the demo phase. I think we need to do some win-loss analysis, and I'd really like to do a really quick positioning effort to make sure that we're focusing on the right value and that demo conversation is focused on that value. And so not only am I describing product marketing in this way, but I'm actually showing people how product marketing is not just kind of like an order taker for one sheets and customer stories. We're a strategic arm of the company that can really impact the bottom line. We can impact these sales metrics that can seem kind of abstract and far removed from product marketing. But when you think about it in that way, like, hey, we're having a churn problem, so let's do win-loss analysis and turn that into, maybe a new focus with our positioning. There's a direct line to those things. So I want to always keep reiterating that to people, especially people who may not have been exposed to product marketing. I work with a lot of earlier stage startups who haven't had a product marketer before. And so they are like, LinkedIn says I need a product marketer, so I hired you. And so I'm in the position to really educate them on what is it and what can it do for you.
Yeah, I think it's our responsibility as well as a team member to mention that out loud, because not many people, like in sales, have not been very used to having a product marketer. They have been very used to having a product manager or solution architects and pre-sales teams. But having a product marketer is kind of a newer role, maybe. But for some companies, it's quite difficult to actually understand what value do you bring. So if there's a gap in that understanding, the conversation and the outcomes of those meetings are just as abrupt as the gap is. So you mentioned it really well, that we need to have it clear on the table what our role is and how we can drive more value, how we hit the right numbers, bring in more revenue. And I think that's something that we all need to be very clear about.
Absolutely. And I think one of the top complaints or frustrations that I hear from product marketers, especially product marketers who are like solo product marketers trying to do it all, is that they just feel inundated with so many requests from all across the organization. Everybody needs something all the time. And I think there's a couple things you can do in order to kind of steer that in a different way. But I think one of the main things you can do is just ask better questions and not take things at face value. So if the sales team is like, hey, we need a competitive battle card for this specific competitor, you can ask questions about that. You don't have to just take the request and say, okay, great, I'll have it to you by Friday. You can say, oh, tell me, I haven't heard of this competitor before. Tell me more about that. Why is that a concern for us now? Is it new? Is it something you've heard multiple times? Do they have a new product that's now suddenly competing? Tell me a little bit more about why you want this. And sometimes it'll be like, I don't know, it's the first time I heard about them on a call and I didn't address it well and that made me really anxious. Great, we can talk about that, but maybe it doesn't deserve like your attention right now. So just putting yourself in the driver's seat and just asking better questions can make you a more strategic product marketer.
Exactly. And I think the answer here is don't always say yes to every
Exactly.
request that we get.
Yeah, sometimes you can give a gentle no, and a gentle no can look like asking more questions and helping someone else come to the no themselves. And it can look like, hey, I've got 47 things on my plate. Which one of these do you think we should drop in order to do that thing? And people being like, oh, okay, I get it. That makes sense.
Right. Yeah. And I think saying no saves you a lot of time and a lot of creation of assets that are not
Yeah,
needed.
exactly, exactly.
So you work closely, really closely with cross-functional teams. And what are some underrated ways that PMMs can build trust and alignment across, other functions as well?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it all is going to boil down to, are you actually being a good partner to those teams? Are you actually doing your level best to provide the things that those teams need and take their feedback and listen to them? There is so much friction between marketing and sales. And I think product marketing is in a really good seat to be able to ease a lot of that, especially if you see your role as being the person to ask the right questions. And I think back to the beginning of our conversation, that's another holdover from my, journalism courses. My job is not to know all the right answers. My job is not to completely understand every single customer conversation, every single detail about our product and our market. That's impossible. But what is my job is having a baseline of knowledge and knowing the right questions to ask and doing something with that information that helps the organization. So that might look like, maybe I just need to dedicate a little bit more time to actually showing up to sales meetings and actually listening and thinking, they're expressing a lot of anxiety about this specific thing. Is there something I can do to help ease that pain? And then coming to them with proactive solutions that say, like, I heard you talk about this, this, and this. I can provide you like with some customer stories that show proof here. Do you think that would help? And then, they're going to say yes or no. And that is going to go a really long way for folks. I think where we get ahead of ourselves and where we cause a lot of problems is we think we know all the answers. And then we write a one pager without ever talking to the sales team. And then we put it in the Google Drive or throw it over the fence and put it in Slack or whatever it is that we do. And we never touch it again. And neither do they. And nobody is happy. We're unhappy because we're like, I put hours of my time into that. Why is nobody using my one sheets? And they're unhappy because they're like, you hand over things that I can't use. And here I am still unequipped to handle these conversations the best way that I possibly could. So yeah, just treating it like a partnership, and partnerships are bi-directional.
Right. I think I'm kind of guilty of doing that.
We all are. We
We
all
all
are.
are.
We get busy
Exactly.
and we are like, I don't have time to have a conversation. I just need to get it done
Yeah.
and throw it over the fence. And I get it.
Exactly.
This is like best case scenario if we have all the resources, but even like slowing it down for a second and giving yourself the time and saying like, I'm, always inclined to be like, I'll get this to you tomorrow, like I want to get things as quickly as possible. But I've learned to say like, I will get it to you Friday, not tomorrow, because I want to give myself like one day to consider and like ask questions. I want to give you a draft and include you in the process of this and get your feedback. And then, and it doesn't take that much extra time. I think my perception has always been like, I can't slow down. I don't have enough time to have all
Yeah.
these conversations, but it actually does. It's kind of like a slingshot effect. It might take a little bit of extra time, but it just goes that much further if we slow down and take that time.
Exactly. And I think half of the pressure comes from being that subject matter expertise on product and having everything, all the knowledge about the product as a product marketer. So I think we tend to focus on not asking much questions because then it looks very conflicting. Like you should be knowing all the answers. So it's like it's kind of very contradictory, but
Yeah.
that's the beauty of this role, I guess.
It is, and it's deeply uncomfortable to me to ask questions and like expose that I don't know something. That's been a huge hurdle and something that's gotten in my way because I would just be like, yes, yes, absolutely. I totally know what you're talking about. And then, go Google it or like dig through our documentation to try and figure it out. And then I would provide something or like, go a different direction than I should have if I had just said like, hang on, I'm sorry. I should probably know this, but I don't. Can you explain it to me really quickly? And people are often like totally not frustrated. They understand, but yeah, that's definitely something that I struggle with too.
Same here. I think most of the product marketers like us do have that, like we are always in that bubble, but
Yeah.
it's always good to once in a while jump out of it and ask questions.
Yeah. It's true. It's
Yeah.
true.
Okay, moving on to one last question of this great session. I just wanted to ask you because we product marketers are juggling storytelling, we are juggling launches, enablement, and more. So, what's one piece of advice you would want to give to someone and help them from burning out?
Yeah. Yes. I've struggled with burnout so many times. I've been in roles where I've just been like survival mode. I've been laid off and then suddenly felt the burnout hit. I'm also a mom to two kids. And so life literally never stops. But I think burnout to me is burnout happens when you are not feeling fulfilled by your work and you're not giving yourself a break from that work. And so, if you think about it, I think about for me, the things that I love, like for example, I love mountain biking and I feel like I could go mountain biking all the time and I could never get sick of it. And I could go every day and explore different trails. And I'm never going to get burned out on that because I enjoy it and because there's constantly a challenge involved, but like a doable challenge. I'm not out here trying to do anything super difficult or like, go off drops that I have no business doing. I'm out there to enjoy the sunshine. I'm out there to get a good workout and have a little bit of fun and challenge myself. So I think if we can see our work the same way, am I learning something? Is it a doable challenge? Do I enjoy the people that I'm working with? And do they seem engaged with me and, with the work that we're doing? Is this, a product that I enjoy working on? And even if it's not like your dream product, is there something that you can see? Can you see impact? I'm a person that I like to see impact, whether it's on our customers or the world at large. And so that is the recipe for me, having kind of all of those pieces in play. And then it doesn't really matter. Like, yes, I'm going to need a break and I have to be very strict with myself about like, I start work at 9 and I log off at 5. I don't have Slack notifications turned on my phone. I am not checking that after hours. I am going mountain biking. I'm doing things that I can't check my Slack. I'm hanging out with my kids and I'm kind of like taking that break. But, you can work long hours and like be working really hard on something if you're engaged with it and never feel burned out. And so I think it is just kind of like this complicated thing that people need to figure out for themselves. You know it when you feel it, that kind of like in the flow feeling of like, oh, I could do this forever. I love this. And it's okay if that thing is not necessarily 100% of your role, but can you maximize the pieces that light you up? Can you find an environment with people who are supportive and who give you those doable challenges? Can you find a leader who supports you and supports you in your growth too? Because I think we feel burnt out when we feel stagnated a little bit, or we feel like there's no opportunity for me to grow and I do the same thing all the time with the same results. And That's not what a lot of us want to be doing. And then also taking like really meaningful, intentional, actual breaks where we are actually not checking Slack on vacation. We are not on Zoom calls, when we should be at the beach with our family so that we can come back refreshed.
I love that because I have never met someone who has never ever felt burnout once in their life. I think it's like
Mhm.
a trajectory that you have to like constantly be at it. And then, there comes a point that you have to actually shut down,
Yeah.
step out of it.
It can be totally
Yeah,
cyclical, like you're talking about. Like if
right.
you don't decide to take those breaks or kind of like be mindful while you're in a situation, your brain and your body will make you take those breaks.
Exactly. I think instead of going to the extremes of both the ends, just have a balance of how you should just figure out, okay, it's getting too much. Let's take a break. Let's rewind. Let's take a step back. Thank you so much, Megan. Where should people reach out to you? Like I would love to
Yeah.
put in the link.
My website is productmarketinghouse.com and my LinkedIn, it's /product marketing Megan. So find me on LinkedIn, send me some DMs. You can find me on my website and send me an email there. But yeah, I'd love to continue the conversation if anybody's interested. And I really appreciate this opportunity to chat with you.
And that's a wrap on today's episode on Behind the Brief. Megan, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing so many practical insights about storytelling, from asking better questions to creating real alignment across teams. This was such a good reminder that creating real impact in product marketing is just as much about people as it is about positioning. So, for all of you listening, if you found this episode helpful, I would love if you could support the show. If you are watching on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe, drop a comment, or share this with someone figuring out their own PMM story. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcast, hit follow and please take 10 seconds to rate the show. It really helps more marketers discover these conversations. So if you want more behind the scenes on product marketing, follow me on LinkedIn or subscribe to the newsletter.